the Cable Television Network Regulation Act 1995 was the first structured regulatory approach for regulating the industry. And after that, the real transformation, the next transformation took place with the digitization of the cable industry, which was completed in 2017, in which the TRAI as the regulator, the MIB, the Ministry of Information Broadcasting, and also all the stakeholders in the industry, they worked together for years to bring about digitalization of the cable industry in the country. To regulate the post-digitalization cable network, TRAI established a comprehensive regulatory framework with the objective of providing a level playing field for all the stakeholders. The idea was to ensure quality of service in this vast ecosystem where there were thousands of players in the entire chain of the broadcasting network, and we had also to protect the consumer interests who could be in the remotest places, and to empower the consumer and to let them have a freedom of choice in selecting the channels that they want to see, and not just be forced to buy everything that the network may be selling. So this was a very significant change. This was sometimes criticized being over-regulation of the industry, but it was the need of the hour because there were significant amount of consumer concern regarding the way the industry was operating. But since then, TRAI has been regularly reviewing this regulation and updating it with the evolving scenario and the changes which are taking place in the industry and the entire ecosystem, and have been rationalizing it. And the latest one that we did was in 2024, which was welcomed by the entire distribution network players, the cable TV network players, where we deregulated wherever we considered that now time was ripe to deregulate, and yet kept on protecting the consumer's interest. So, but we haven't stopped there. When we issued that regulation last year, the day we issued the regulation, we promised that we will carry out a more holistic review very shortly, and we have already started a pre-consultation process. And this pre-consultation process, interestingly, is now bringing up issues related to the regulation of the digital broadcasting. The stakeholders themselves are bringing before us the issues which need to be looked into. So, that brings us to the topic of the digital broadcasting. Now, we have seen after the advent of the cable TV and the direct-to-home broadcasting and the hits and the IPTV, so gradually now we are entering into the domain of digital streaming, where we have number of platforms streaming the content over the OTT platforms, and also the free ad-supported streaming television is also has come in. Even the premium ad-supported streaming television is also there. So these are the new methods of broadcasting which are coming in, and a recent industry studies shows that digital media has now surpassed the linear television in 2024 in terms of the industry segment that it deals with. And the digital media in 2024 in India stood at nearly $9.4 billion as against $8 billion of the linear television. and it was already ahead of the linear television in that sense. Fast channel segment is also gaining traction in India, and it is offering linear TV-like experience with curated content streaming, which are supported by the advertisements. And the audience is a significant segment of the audience is patronizing it because of the experience that they get, which is quite similar to the linear TV broadcasting. So one of the important factors which is influencing the rapid growth of OTT and fast TV, we can say, is the availability of affordable high-speed internet in India. India, as we know, is one of the lowest cost in terms of the broadband connectivity. So the per GB cost is barely $0.12, which is one of the lowest in the world. There are also a lot of advantages in the OTT platforms, like the interactive experience, the availability of host of regional content, which a consumer can get on this, personalization of the content, the freedom of the time, and the choice of the content that you want to see. So all this makes significant positives for the digital broadcasting segment. And why not so? With the growth of technology, the consumer should get better and better experience, even in terms of the quality of the video and the audio that they are getting to see. But then this brings us to the question of, are we dealing the linear TV and the digital TV on the same level? So that's the question which then comes before us. And here we find that the linear TV regulation, which has evolved over such a long time in a very, very structured way, and of course it has with time been also updated, moderated, and liberalized in accordance with the needs of the time, but still it continues to have a structured regulation. Whereas if we see the digital broadcasting or digital streaming platforms, etc., it is very light touch, and in certain areas almost nil regulation. And where now we have two sets of issues which are currently the issues under discussion and cause of concern in various forums. One is the content part, where we have a programming and advertising code as part of the cable TV network rules notified by the government, and which is well regulated in terms of the content. Whereas in case of the digital platforms, it is more of self-regulation, and they are not strictly bound by the programming and advertising codes. So there are concerns being raised regarding the content which is being disseminated. Very recently, even the Supreme Court of India has asked the government, issued a notice to the government in respect to a public interest litigation on the need of regulating the content in the digital streaming services. So, so that is one aspect of it. Another aspect is when you are dealing two mediums or two or more mediums of broadcasting. So we should not be putting one medium of broadcasting at a regulatory disadvantage. The regulation by itself, should not put one segment of the industry at disadvantage compared to another segment of the industry. Maybe if the technology itself brings a particular medium at advantage, it is fine. but we should not be having regulation which creates a disparity. So that is another question. And the third aspect also is the consumer perspective. While in one case we are having adequate provisions to protect the consumer in terms of the prices or customer service or the kind of deal that the customer is getting, whereas in other case we either do not have or we have very small sets of measures, or we have measures in a very different manner and not in the same structured manner as for the regular linear TV broadcasting. So these are the various aspects which are arising. So if you see in terms of the digital streaming, we have the IT Act and the guidelines, social intermediary guidelines issued thereunder, which are being utilized for regulating the OTT services, OTT platforms, as well as the social media intermediaries. So that's how currently it is being managed. When the draft broadcasting bill in the Ministry of Information Broadcasting was in the process of preparing a new broadcasting act, and in that process they had prepared a draft broadcasting bill and put it up for public consultation. And they had tried to, in that draft bill, the ministry the government brought in the issue of regulating the OTT streaming platforms also for the discussion. That's a matter currently under consultation, and as and when the government takes a view, maybe we'll have a better clarity on how the government formulates the act in this regard. So as far as other steps that have been taken in terms of the regulation, I would like to mention the recent work that has been done in terms of the new Telecommunication Act. And we have a new Telecommunication Act which came in 2023. And the current regulatory framework for the broadcasting, which had evolved over last maybe 30 years, in terms of various guidelines for different types of broadcasting services. So under the new act, TRAI has carried out a complete thorough review of all the current regulatory mechanisms, and we have recommended to government a completely overhauled simplified authorization framework for the broadcasting services, and which for dealing with 9 types of broadcasting services very comprehensively. And we have also tried to harmonize various types of the terms and conditions for various broadcasting services, and brought about a significant amount of ease of doing the business for the broadcasting sector therein. Also, we have brought in the regulations for the new services such as the ground-based broadcasting. So, for instance, right now the broadcasting requires to be done through the satellite, whereas now we do have ground-based infrastructure, both wireline as well as wireless, which can be utilized for the broadcasting. So TRAI has recommended a complete framework for the ground-based broadcasting, which is also again technology agnostic, whether it could be wired or it could be wireless. Also, number of other initiatives have been taken for the ease of doing business. For example, infrastructure sharing has been allowed between the telecommunication companies as well as the broadcasting companies or other infrastructure providers, with the intention of bringing down the cost and utilizing the infrastructure which is already available. We have also given a simplified framework for the radio, where we have proposed for delinking the authorization and the acquisition of spectrum for the actual broadcasting service. Whereas in the current system, the license as well as the spectrum are linked and have to be taken together only. So, which again, simplifies the thing, and an authorized entity, once having taken authorization, can start radio services in any city. We are also already in the process of consultation for introduction of the digital radio broadcasting, and will soon be recommending a policy roadmap for the digital radio broadcasting in the country. I would also like to mention that only about 6 months back or so, TRAI also gave a comprehensive recommendation to the government on national broadcasting policy, again with the aim of ease of doing business, propelling growth in the broadcasting sector, promoting content creation, and protecting the interests of the various stakeholders, particularly against the piracy and the consumer interest, etc. So that a very comprehensive recommendation for policy, national broadcasting policy, has also been given to the government by TRAI. And also we have recommended for revamping the audience measurement system, so that there could be multiple agencies who could be rating the audience, and there is more reliable data available on the audience, which can be utilized for more better pricing of the advertising. So coming to the digital broadcasting, as I mentioned that we have the under the Information Technology Act, the Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code, which is governing the services for online intermediaries, which include the social media platforms, the messaging applications, and as well the video streaming services in India. So the social media intermediaries and online gaming intermediaries, these are administered by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, that is METI, while the publishers of news and current affairs content and publishers of online curated content are administered by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting under these intermediary guidelines. So we do have a mechanism for regulating the digital media, but there is a difference in the set of principles and the provisions with respect to the content regulation, and also the way these are regulated between the digital broadcasting and the linear TV. So which is an issue which I think needs to be looked into going forward. So I have already mentioned regarding the concerns being raised regarding the content recently in a public interest litigation, and also in certain parliamentary forums as well as in public discourse also, which is an issue which needs to be looked into. So with this, I think we are in, I would just in my conclusion like to say, while going forward, we have to see that we have the least regulation governing the industry, but it should be adequate to protect the interests of the consumer, to protect the various stakeholders of the industry, particularly those stakeholders who are at the lower end of the pyramid, whose protection we have to ensure in this framework. If we see the people who are at the top end, the entities who are at the top end of the pyramid would like to have more and more freedom and less of regulation. But as we go on the bottom side of the pyramid, as we go to the maybe local cable operators or the consumers, the feedback that we get, they want more and more regulation. So we are in a situation where we get contradicting demands from various stakeholders, and we have to strike a balance. We have to facilitate growth of the industry. We have to facilitate innovation, creation, and we have to facilitate that the consumer gets the best in terms of the technology available, yet we have to protect the interests of the consumers, and we have to protect those stakeholders who are otherwise vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So before the start, this is again, I want to welcome Philomena Nanapragasam, CEO of AIBT. Thank you, ma'am. And sir.
It gives us a clear view of all the great and good initiatives which TRAI and the government is undertaking for the entire ecosystem. So I think thank you so much for the keynote. And I would straight like to start with the questions because we have a little bit of time constraint. And from your keynote, I'm going to pick up and put the question or rephrase the question because we have a lot of youth here, and they would agree with me that today, because the content is regulated differently on the traditional broadcast, which is TV and digital, most of the audiences also move from traditional to digital because there is a higher affinity for the audience and acceptance for that content. So whilst it is, I would not say loosely regulated, but less regulated, that is exactly what probably today the audience wants to see. And this will definitely somewhere create a digital divide between the traditional broadcast platforms and let's say the social media and the OTT platforms. So, Anilji, I would first like to ask you that do you think that yes, there is a digital divide here? And do you also feel the need that there can be certain regulations which can be common between the both so that we can get them closer to a level playing field?
I think this is one of the important issue which is facing this, and I won't use the word digital divide or the phrase digital divide, but yes, there is clearly a difference manner in which content is regulated in the traditional linear television and the manner in which it is regulated on the digital streaming platforms, where it is more of self-regulation and it is governed by the social media intermediary guidelines, whereas in case of linear TV, it is governed by the cable television network. So as far as content is concerned, I would say as far as the consumer is concerned, irrespective of the medium that they are using, what should control or the content, principally it needs to be more or less same. Why there doesn't seem to be a reason why in one media you could be seeing another content and in other media you could be seeing another content. So principally I would say there's a need to align it should be media agnostic rather. So content regulation. How we reach that level, I think that's a long way to go. This is an issue not only in India, it's a worldwide an issue, and it has to be carefully negotiated so that we don't stifle the creative freedom, yet we ensure parity in the content.
Thank you, Anilji, and I think, personally, I think I agree with you. But I'd like to ask the same question to Carolina. Carolina, welcome to India, welcome to Waves. And you have significantly worked, internationally. What is your experience? Would you, do you see this digital divide globally? And, what are companies kind of doing from a policy perspective, to kind of regulate the OTT or digital content more maturely?
Indian government for this impressive gathering. I've learned a lot this morning. And in terms of the issues at stake here today, in terms of digital divide or in terms of having there are lots of words in the keynote that really resonate, like level playing field, consumer good, consumer protection. We come from a world, especially in Europe, just a couple of words on what MFE, the company I represent here, stands for, so that you know what we're dealing with. I deal with regulation in Brussels, but we started out in the 80s mainly with linear channels, and in Spain for almost 30 years now. And we also own a 30% stake in Germany's second largest commercial broadcaster. So in this competitive arena, our aim is to do what we can do best in delivering linear services complemented by VOD or TVOD, but our core business is linear television. So we take pride in being fully regulated and fully accountable. Now, the divide we see, even though Europe has been in the forefront or tried to fill up this gap, especially because it's not only in terms of consumer protection, but it's also a gap, a value gap in terms of return on investment and content. You mentioned piracy, you mentioned illegal distribution of copyrighted materials. So I think Europe, especially with the Digital Services Act, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a regulation that tried to move away from the safe harbor, which is of US origin, that was ingrained in European legislation in the early 2000s in the e-commerce directive, which sort of mimicked the American safe harbor, i.e. meaning no liability whatsoever for digital platforms, with an increased regime of due diligence responsibility for what we call very large online platforms, so that it is a way not to curb growth of digital startups in Europe, but also to increase responsibilities on platforms that in the past 20 years reaped huge benefits. They have been competing with linear broadcasters, especially we are just ad-funded, commercial broadcaster ad-funded. We've got no other revenues. And we've been competing for the past 15 years with platforms we had no regulation whatsoever. In Europe, for example, the old Television Without Frontiers Directive, which was adopted in 1989, and it's now the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. The last revision in 2018 envisaged a limited regime of responsibility for video sharing platforms with just some qualitative requirements, for example, for the protection of minors, but there was no way to establish limits for advertising. So yet, I could speak for hours, but in terms of curbing the huge power of these platforms in the advertising realm, there is another provision, the Digital Markets Act, that try to prevent with ex-ante regulation the huge market power of these platforms. So there is I would say that these regulations in your DSA and DMA, Digital Services Act, so increased liability for very large online platforms, and Digital Markets Act providing for ex-ante antitrust measures for platforms that have over 45 million consumers, users, and over 10,000 business users. You have ex-ante provisions, anti-steering, providing anti-bundling, self-preferencing. So if I may say, try to lessons learned from India. Just a couple of weeks ago, the antitrust, on 21st of April, the Indian Antitrust Commission took what I believe is a landmark decision. I wish we had something like this in Europe. It was actually a complaint lodged by two individuals claiming that Google had a dominant position in the original equipment manufacturing for licensed smart TVs. And what Google did is that it it prevented Indian manufacturers from marketing TV sets which were not bundled with, say, Google Play, YouTube. And further to this settlement, now the Indian manufacturers can provide to the market TV sets which are not bundled with Google Play, YouTube. So they're not preset. I would say this is something that we are trying. It's not only important for TV manufacturers. We no longer have an industry for TV production, for TV set hardware production in Europe. But it's a landmark decision for providers of audiovisual media services, meaning that we are going towards a world where the fastest growing, especially in Europe, the fastest growing penetration of smart TV sets is with TV sets which carry the Android OS. And that OS actually controls the middleware and the user interface. And you might ask, don't you have the same problem with Samsung or Apple TV? No, because there is no other, and what we say, gatekeeper, that has such a network effects of different core platform services intertwined. So that OS supports search, and search becomes the EPG in our living room, Google Search. You've got YouTube, which is an intermediary services whereby broadcast service consumers are being nudged to accessing our services via YouTube, and then you bundle Google Play, and then so there is a whole, I would say, so that's what I said, network effects of intertwined core platform services that make Google almost, and of course the ad tech stack, where Google controls the sell-side platform, the buy-side platform, and the ad exchange in the middle. I would conclude, I think that unless we have not just ex-ante rules to protect users, but either ex-ante as we have in Europe with the DMA, or ex-post severe antitrust interventions, we will no longer have pluralism, because if there's no competition, there's no way that we can find that linear broadcaster can fund quality news, can fund local productions. So it will be the end of the world as we know it, with the pluralistic offer of local content and qualitative journalism. So I would say it's both ex ante and ex post antitrust to maintain pluralism and the capacity to finance local content.
Thanks, Carolina. And that's this is a case the Competition Commission of India handled, and I think they put a fine of close to 20 crores on Google. And it's good to know that the global is also learning from some case studies in India, and we are setting an example. But how the ecosystem will kind of progress, especially with smart TVs, I think it's still evolving in India. So it's yet that we need to see how it kind of progresses. Philomena, I would like to you have worked with both public and private broadcasters. It is very important from a content perspective also to protect the last mile or the viewer. Now, between the private and the public broadcasters, from a content perspective, have you seen, or rather, what frameworks have you seen from a policy perspective to ensure that measures are put to protect the consumers from harmful content, whilst also upholding the freedom of the media? What is your experience? And Philomena, she's the CEO of AIBD. It's an international organization. They work with almost 26, APAC, 26 APAC countries. So if you could share your international, global experience in this, it'll be grateful.
Thank you, Kashyap. Can you hear me? Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. And I think it's fantastic to be here, speaking in a country where the DNA of entertainment industry is very prevalent. And so congratulations on the opening of Waves today. I would like to just, share an analogy. Now, the biggest thing that has changed everything that we are talking about today is the advent of internet. And I think the chairman of TRI mentioned with fast speed internet, everything has changed, right? So you've actually unleashed a jungle out there. And do you agree with me? It's a jungle out there. And when I say a jungle, wild animals everywhere. And how do you control it? And that's where people like TRI play an important role in regulating. Now, of course, there's a very thin line between regulation and human rights and so forth. But today, Kashyap, your question is very interesting. But I have to ask, how many of you actually watch, government television or public-owned TV? Can you just be honest and put up your hands? Be honest, guys. Okay, right. We still have loyal viewers, huh? And how many of you are on OTT platforms, consuming media? Oh, wow, okay. So I'm not going to say anything because this is the digital realm, all right? Yeah. So one of the things that has happened globally is we were not prepared. Of course, those days when you just had television content, you'd probably have things like, all those PG-13 or 18 or, all those numbers that you see, which I've forgotten myself. But what's happening is today, we have the advent of digital OTT platforms. You have podcasts, you have social media. Everyone is a creator of content. How many of you do your own content? Wow, you're so honest, So this is the world today. We're talking about user-generated content. And who actually regulates you? Nobody, right? So everyone is a content creator. Everyone is sort of free to do what they want. And that's the kind of change that we are talking about, that internet has brought. So we've really unleashed something different. And therefore, what is regulation, right? I think the gentleman, chairman actually brought out an interesting point about having a new law, which I think is important. Because, I come from Malaysia, and we don't have a broadcasting law anymore, right? And so what are you talking about? Do we really need a broadcasting law? We need a digital law? Well, what kind of law do we need? So basically, I think what has changed over the world is the type of platform. Platforms have changed. And platforms have changed because of technology, right? So the tech has completely changed the way you consume media. Tech has completely changed the type of content that's being created. And it has changed you and me because, we all consume everything from our mobile, right? So that's the kind of thing. So if you ask me a question like, how do you ensure between private or public television, watching Netflix, for instance, the kind of content that goes through it, how many of us feel that, because movies, programs are supposed to reflect a culture. Now, India showcased a beautiful, beautiful culture today. I think I still have that song singing in my head, So that's the kind of culture we're talking about. Years of storytelling. Now, where is it in this today's scenario? What kind of stories are we seeing on the internet? What kind of stories are getting likes? Who's regulating this content? So I think what's very important is to ask ourselves, and as parents, as educators, as civil society, what do we want to leave for our future generation? We're talking about a rich creative industry here, but what are we going to leave behind? And this is where things like media literacy, understanding what we need to give back to the society to come, for our children and for generations to come. What do we actually want to leave with them? Are we just going to leave them with a global culture, which is really, seriously, whose culture is it? Right? So these are questions that, I know I'm asking a lot of questions on a very sleepy afternoon, just after lunch, but these are things we need to think about. So regulators today have a huge role to play. And I think regulatory bodies need to work closely with broadcasters, with independent producers, with a whole lot of content makers. So there need to be this, what do you call this thing, this co-sharing of ideas and this sort of things that can actually help to maintain a strong and resilient, what do you call this, the industry itself, right? To make sure that content goes on, because content is always king. Today I heard every one of you just screaming when Shah Rukh Khan came right after Prime Minister Modi, So, including me. So anyway, that's because we are all we're being dictated by the media industry, right? Whether it's songs or singing or dancing or acting, I think these people are the opinion leaders. So let's create some great content. Let's have some good regulation. And so I'm all for regulation, but I think the gentleman brought out a very interesting point, over-regulating, killing certain industries. Some are regulated, some are not. So it's a very tricky affair on regulations. But again, it goes back to us. Literacy, digital literacy, media literacy, educating the youth of tomorrow. These are things that we should look into. Thank you, Kashyap.
Very, very well said, Philomena, very well said. And, I think the way I look at it, it's like co-regulation, right? The entire, or rather most of the stakeholders in the value chain, they have a role to play, right? Whether it's the platform, or it is the creator, the audience, and the regulator. So all four of them need to kind of come together and then play a key role in kind of regulating the content. And I believe what Anilji said is self-regulation is going to be a key consideration because, we are on the internet, things will fly very, very fast. By the time even regulator comes to know about it, I think, the control is lost. And that is why I think SRO, the self-regulatory organizations, establishment is very, very critical, which is included in the governance. Ahmed, I'm really sorry. I think you've been waiting. Ahmed, you also have a lot of international experience with, ABU and content moderation, which is one of the control points before, it is put live. I think it is a very, very important thing. Most of the digital platforms, they have their own content moderation, I would say, framework strategies. We would like to know from you that, what is your experience across broadcasters, across digital platforms? How do they moderate content, one? Second is that, have you seen use of tech, use of AI when it comes to content moderation?
Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Kashyap, for the question. And everyone, I think, wonderfully justifying the need for a level of regulation. But if you ask those content creators, for example, do you want to be regulated? You said it's not regulated now. See, the question, someone says yes, someone says no. This is the difficulty for people like Mr. Lahoti here and governments. This is not an easy thing. And especially when most of the governments and industry players in countries like us, we start with open regulation, and then we start strictening it. That creates a difficulty in terms of public sentiment also. To a level, if you strengthen the regulation, as Mr. Lahoti said, we don't want to be in a place where we narrow it so much that we kill the creativity in it. So that's difficult. Coming from ABU, we are a non-profit professional organization of broadcasters in the region. Broadcasters in the region. I repeat, broadcasters in the region. This is a word which by itself has been challenged now. What is broadcasting? So one question is OTT equal to broadcast?
True.
Again, there will be different views from the floor. This is also a difficult thing. So what Mr. Lahoti highlighted is broadcasters, they have to obey a level of content regulation. But what if broadcasters now who are putting their content on OTT platforms, what regulates them? Because most of the broadcasters, even public broadcasters, they have their own OTT platforms now. So if you are leaving the OTT platforms unregulated to a very less regulated form, then the content that the broadcasters themselves, who are used to be linear, are put in there. How do you justify to them that the content that they are producing or they are putting on there should also be regulated or open? Many countries do have different ways of tackling this issue. For example, in some of the advanced countries like Japan, where, even in Australia, for example, they started with open regulation, but they are slowly moving to a place where they want to make it tighter. Why? Because it is affecting the culture, the traditions of the country. Why we have regulations in place and governance systems in place, regardless of the industry, is to have a level of security and safeguard as well as a level of accountability. This is not something that is easy to maintain, but there is a need for it. For example, these youngsters who nowadays are creative content producers, but when you grow up and when you become fathers, mothers of children, and when your kids are enjoying those content there, you will realize, there is a need of some level of regulation here. Different countries have different methods of regulating. Some are doing it very light. Some have very tight regulations in different countries. Some have everything completely regulated, like in countries like Vietnam and China. So there are two different types of regulation here. One is content level regulation, the other one is platform level regulation. When you talk about platform level regulation, what you're saying is that you don't want some people to just come and start their own OTT platform. What about those who are using YouTube to produce their content? It's not an easy dynamic that we are facing. You don't want them to start their OTT platform because you want to regulate it. But there are so many people who are producing their content and putting it on existing platforms like YouTube, for example. Then how do you regulate that? So it's very difficult. Then there's, of course, hybrid style, co-regulation. I think this is probably what we are trying to do, where you have a framework, a wider framework set by the government and the authorities. Then you have the industry players coming together and agreeing that, okay, we want to regulate to some extent. These are associations. For example, you may have, I don't know whether you have it here, some countries might have now, association of OTT players. They might come together and say, okay, we need to have some level of regulation among the content that we are doing and what we are existing. Some countries, for example, I was recently in Kyrgyzstan, in Central Asia, where there's no regulation at the moment, but they are now stifling it to the extent that some of the existing linear broadcasters went out of business because it is so open that you can download any content, you can create your own presence on the internet, and then push that content inside those channels, and it costs about $20 per week for any advertiser to advertise anything there. $20 a week, how are you going to survive? These existing broadcasters or linear channels or those who are doing their own production and all. So now the government is coming in to stifle a bit, but it's not going to be easy. Because as I said, when you leave something open, and then when you start putting pressure on it, there will be some level of negative sentiment coming from the public. So that creates a difficulty. So how do you address something where you have different industries and different entities overlapping each other? That's the difficulty. For example, let's say TRAI is doing something, then you have MITI talking about a different part of it, then you have INB talking about a different part of it. I think we need to understand that we are looking at a giant that we haven't seen in the past. This is very, very different what we are dealing with now. So there's a need for us all to come together actually and start working together to see whether we can have some common grounds of understanding of how much this is going to affect, not only now, even into the future. Because we cannot have situations like where any broadcaster or anybody can go and put anything online. Even this is done by broadcasters also to some extent, even international broadcasters. Put something on the screen and then say that we cannot verify it. This is probably where this is where things go very wrong. You know? Because people who watch this content, they make their own opinions with it. and then they start sharing it. And so we are in a world where everybody has an opinion, and these opinions kind of set the agenda for the day. So that makes it very, very difficult, very, very difficult. So regulating content to some extent is necessary. How far we will go, it depends from country to country, industry to industry. But I think the most important thing is for all of these different entities to come together and start working together. Otherwise, I don't feel that we will come to a place where we will all enjoy the entertainment content or whatever content we have on screens. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. I think very valuable point of view. But I'm just going to continue the question a little bit, extending it to, do you foresee in the future that user-generated content, if it is done at a professional level, will be regulated, or they will need some kind of licensing?
This is where the question becomes difficult. Professional level. Are you meaning that, okay, the content producer has to have a registered association or an organization to do it? Then if you're going to put regulations on them, then what about those users who do their own? Yeah. So it's a very complicated area now. I think collectively, if we ask everyone here, yes, some level of regulation is needed. I would say majority of you will agree that some level of regulation is needed, but finding that balance where you don't kill the creative industry by over-regulating is where we need to find. But then different countries are different. Countries like what the example I gave, like Vietnam and China, for example, are very, very different countries because the way they have come from the beginning is different. This is not exactly the same, but for example, when Uber came, some countries took it very openly, and it killed one huge industry. Livelihood of people were lost actually, because there was no safeguard put in place. But in countries like Japan, for example, they didn't allow it. They started regulating from zero. They said, no, Uber cannot come in and do whatever they are doing. Because there needs to be a safeguard to the existing industries. People's livelihoods will go otherwise. So yes, level of regulation is needed. A level of insight into these, how other countries are, for example, doing is also needed. But again, finding that balance is the challenge that we have.
Thanks, Ahmed. I think, again, Philomena, you wanted to share your point of view.
Thank you, Kashyap. Now, just like to share based on what Nadeem just mentioned, and your question on is user-generated content. What did you just say? Will it?
So, user-generated content, it can either be at a professional level or somebody's casually doing it. Mm-hmm. At least for the UGC who is doing it at a professional, that means he's charging a fee.
Yeah.
Do we need to regulate that? Do we foresee in the future that this part will be regulated? And I think Nadeem very clearly says that no, why not this too? So,
okay. So I think here we are talking about a very thin line between freedom of expression, expressing creativity, and if you even go online, you would see the number of podcasters that are out there. So there's a lot of creativity that's coming out, and here we're talking about, enhancing the creative industry. Now, I'd just like to share the example of one country, Korea, right? Now, Korea has media literacy centers. Now, very interesting, because I was in Korea, and what they actually do is these centers allow people to come and, produce their own content. And these content are created by people like, senior citizens, women, housewives, and young people. And the kind of content they create is something that public broadcasters or even private channels or OTT are not doing, okay? Some of it are very interesting, like, things that, price of goods, for instance, certain things that actually relate to the society. So these are some of the content that people create. Interesting content that gets to them. It's talking about themselves, their own lives. Because if you look at all this, it's all storytelling. Huh? It's how we are telling it. Are we putting it on an OTT? Are we creating a... This is a content by themselves about something, about an issue. And in the Korean Media Literacy Center, they learn about the importance of actually creating good content, authentic, credible, accurate, not fake stuff, but real stuff that probably changes. So I think that user-generated content is important because today anyone is a content maker. Anyone can broadcast something just sitting at home and, putting it on air. It's just a change. The technology has changed. Everything is possible today. So if you ask me about whether you regulate, it really depends if that person is sitting there and creating some hate speech or some anti-political kind of things, then it becomes a huge issue. So it still calls for monitoring. So this is where Chairman of TRI and the rest of the people from different parts of the world, regulation is important, but at the same time, I think we need to tell people who are going to be content makers today, from now to the youth, to whoever it is, the importance of creating credible content. You say what you mean and mean what you say. I think that's the first rule in communication if you want to be a broadcaster or a content maker. Thank you.
Thanks, Philomena. And yes, Carolina, please.
Quick comment. Set aside the fact that we have different constitutions and constitutional values. So in the States, you've got the First Amendment that freedom of expression prevails over every other right. But in Europe, for example, first of all, in terms of influencer, which are communications professionals, the European Commission is thinking about regulating influencers within the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, within the next revision, which is due next year. But in the past, say, 10, 15 years, the whole discourse over what is UGC, anything can be UGC, from illegal dissemination of copyright-protected materials to exploitation of misinformation, disinformation for political ends, which becomes very, very dangerous of public discourse in our democracies. So in the end, it boils down, our platform, publishers or not, do they have editorial responsibility or not? And the orientation in the EU has been whether or not the platform exploits that content. So if you sell advertising around that content, and if you have the leeway to take down the content because it's not supposedly compliant with your terms of services, and you're not actually you're not accountable by law as we providers of general interest services are, so the platform is a publisher, so the platform is responsible. And this is a matter of paramount importance for the well-functioning of our democracy. So nothing to say about these young creators. You've got the right to do whatever you want, but then there's got to be some kind of oversight. And in our experience, self-regulation alone is not enough unless there are sanctions.
Right. Very, 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 very nicely put. And I think the creators are going to be very happy, at least the ones which are here. And I think we've overshot our time. But, just to summarize, I think the gist of the discussion was that, yes, there are borders which clearly need to be defined. Regulation is important, whilst it should be upheld that, yes, creativity should not, get jeopardized. And some things which Philomena said, I think very sensitive, is that the culture. So nobody can stop you from viewing whether TV or OTT, but whatever is being shown to you, is that your culture? And because everything cannot be regulated, it is a matter of choice. So with that, I think I would like to thank all the panel members. It was a very good discussion.
Thanks to you continues to grow to our guest, whose words lit up the day. We are grateful you join us in this special way. Thank you very much.